very much, and I know you've all had a long day, but I'll try and keep my more formal remarks a little brief so that we can actually have a discussion. I do want very much to thank the organizers of ABP's Networks Ideas of India 2025. I think it's been a fascinating conference already so far, and the topic they've given me is both timely and significant. The Great Indian Migration is what they've called it. What now in a world of walls? I do want to extend, as I said, my gratitude to the ABP Network for creating this platform and discussing ideas that will shape our country in the future. And I must say, migration is not merely a policy issue. It is a human story woven into our history and our collective aspirations. So to understand Indian migration today, we've got to look back at its origins. Migration has been driven by historical forces, economic imperatives, sheer survival, sometimes even force. Under British rule, more than 2 million Indians were sent abroad as indentured laborers between 1834 and 1917. They built Singapore, they created so many foreign countries, and their descendants are now citizens of those countries. They endured brutal conditions, yet their resilience has shaped the cultural fabric of their adopted lands, from Mauritius to Trinidad and of course, Guyana. And over time, migration evolved. Labor, traders, professionals, entrepreneurs started moving, seeking opportunities worldwide. The 20th century saw waves of Indian migration to the UK, to North America, Africa, and the Gulf, and this culminated in the tech-driven exodus of the 1990s, when Indian professionals became sought-after global talent. Today, Indians are no longer just workers abroad. They are leaders, shaping global industries. From Sundar Pichai at Google to Satya Nadella at Microsoft, we've seen Indian migrants driving innovation and enjoying economic power, heading a significant number of Fortune 500 companies. History has proven to us that migration has always been a force multiplier, enriching both migrants and host nations. Yes, in an era of rising walls, both physical and political, migration faces unprecedented scrutiny. The question is not whether migration should happen, but whether nations will recognize the boundless potential it offers. I began my UN career an awfully long time ago with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and I remember we used to issue a poster with a very familiar photograph on that poster saying, "A bundle of belongings is not the only thing a refugee brings to his new country," and below the photo were the words simply, "Einstein was a refugee." And we were trying to encourage people to think of refugees as an opportunity, as a source of talent. Now, for decades, the lure of the American dream, and for many in India, the Canadian alternative, has beckoned young Indians with the prospect of economic opportunity, social mobility, and the chance to build a better future. Most who leave are not revolutionaries or fugitives, as they were in many cases in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, but they're pragmatic individuals seeking a fair shot at prosperity. It's a vast expanse of opportunity in major US cities, the promise of work, the prospect of anonymity just disappearing into the woodwork until one day an amnesty might come. This is what draws them in, offering them a chance to rebuild their lives, and often initially in terrible conditions, but later to acquire the dignity they felt they were lacking back at home. The global economy thrives on their skills, whether it's our IT engineers in Silicon Valley or our cab drivers navigating the streets of Toronto. Migration is not driven by ambition alone. Some, particularly from Punjab, seek asylum, citing persecution, claims dismissed by Indian officials as opportunistic fabrications. Still, we have to ask, why are these claims made at all? A confident democracy should confront, not dismiss, the disillusionment that fuels them. We celebrate tech billionaires while youth unemployment soars, showcase gleaming infrastructure while millions struggle for dignified work. India's growth story remains a paradox. Booming statistics, shrinking opportunities, and a rising power still unable to assure its own people that their future lies at home. Gujarat is a state that's been championed as an economic success story, the very launchpad of our Prime Minister's rise, and yet it sees thousands risking everything to leave. If prosperity were truly abundant, would so many seek an uncertain future abroad? Punjab also presents a stark paradox. Revered as India's breadbasket, it feeds the nation, yet its youth are leaving in droves. The lure of foreign shores is not merely about ambition, it's often about survival. Rising unemployment, dwindling agricultural reforms, and modest returns, and an insidious drug crisis in Punjab have eroded hope, leaving many with little choice but to seek their fortunes abroad, legally or otherwise. When people from India's most prosperous states are amongst the most desperate to leave, then the issue isn't just migration, it's the conditions that make escape for them a necessity rather than a choice. In their despair, many turn to shadowy networks, paying staggering sums to be smuggled across borders, not out of recklessness, but because they see no future in the land they once called home. The consequences are stark. What was once the path of young single men now sees entire middle-class families, once the bedrock of India's ambitions, risking everything for a fresh start abroad. I don't know how many of you remember the story a couple of years ago of the middle-class family from Gujarat that froze to death on the Canadian-American border during the peak of winter trying to cross over from Canada illegally to America. There were photos of their home in Gujarat, a perfectly reasonable, upper-middle-class looking residence. Why did they leave? These are questions we owe it to ourselves as a nation to ask ourselves. For many who leave, the struggle doesn't end when they cross the border. It follows them, sometimes in the most tragic ways. We hear of migrants working endless hours in exploitative conditions, of families back home waiting for news that never comes, and when disaster strikes, even death does not often bring closure. Just recently, reports have surfaced of crowdfunding campaigns raising lakhs, ostensibly to bring back the bodies of deceased NRIs, yet in far too many cases that money never reaches their grieving families. Just imagine that. A system where people leave because they feel they have no choice, and even in death they remain abandoned. Migration should not come at the cost of dignity in life or in death. If India is to truly rise, it must become a nation where people do not feel compelled to leave, but feel empowered to stay. The question is not just why they leave, but what they find when they get there. The American dream, once seen as a golden ticket, is increasingly a mirage. Many find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of uncertainty, living in fear of deportation, working jobs that barely sustain them, struggling to integrate into societies that at times view them with suspicion. Immigration has long been an integral part of human history, shaping civilizations, economies, societies across the globe. India, with its rich tradition of global engagement, has seen our people traverse continents in pursuit of opportunity, knowledge, and a better future. And as I said, every year millions are embarking on this journey, making India today the country with the highest number of migrants in the world. But with each movement also comes the challenge of irregular migration, an issue that's drawn increasing attention these days, particularly with the US. Now let me be unequivocal, every sovereign nation has the right to enforce its immigration laws and uphold the integrity of its borders. The US and its recent actions is well within its legal authority to return those who've entered their territory unlawfully. However, the manner in which this process is conducted is equally important. Deportation, when necessary, must be carried out with dignity and respect for human rights. The recent images of shackled and handcuffed migrants being loaded onto military aircraft, reminiscent more of a criminal extradition than an immigration enforcement measure, have understandably sparked widespread concern in our country. And let's be clear, it's not an isolated incident, nor, by the way, is deportation just being conducted because Mr. Trump won the election.